My name is Dora. I'm a Senegal 17 alum, and I'm currently working for Global Citizenry as an alumni engagement associate. I'm based in Athens, Greece, and I'm here working in the solidarity movement with refugees and asylum seekers. And I'm really excited for today's session. So we have a small group of people with us today, which should be nice to have kind of like an intimate session with April to be able to ask her all of our questions that might pop up. So I will go ahead and introduce April now. So April Rinne has been weaving a story about how to navigate change personally and professionally for as long as she can remember. Her book, FLUX, Superpowers for Thriving in Constant Change, is the container to express this story and cast a broader vision for humanity as a whole. A World Economic Forum Young Global Leader and ranked one of the 50 leading female futurists in the world by Forbes, April Rinne is a change navigator. She helps individuals and organizations rethink and reshape their relationship with change, uncertainty, and a world in flux. She is a trusted advisor to well-known startups and companies, financial institutions, nonprofits, and think tanks worldwide. So we're really grateful to have April with us today. And we'll kick things off with a big question for you, if that's okay. So our first question is, what led you to write your book, FLUX, in such a kind of a perfect timing where it seems like everyone and everything in the world is in a state of change?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, thank you, Dora, and the entire Global Citizenry team. I am just really happy to be here. I think this has been a long time in coming for me because I've actually been part of the Global Citizenry ecosystem since the very beginning. I always like to say if Global Citizenry had existed when I was 17, it would have changed my life. I wish I could have done something like Global Citizenry, but I've crafted a career and a life that's, been some version of that, but it was much harder to do. So what you are all doing and stand for and engaged in is really near and dear to my heart. And so for all of you, like wherever you are in this Global Citizenry world, I'm just really thankful for you and to join you. And I should also mention, and we'll come back to this a little bit later, that I know we're here from all over the world. The first half of my career was focused exclusively on global development. And that time and the time that I've spent working in largely emerging economies, largely with economically active poor, very much informed a lot of what I've written about for FLUX and about change. So I'll come back to that, but I just want to be a real open book in terms of Q&A, and like everything is fair game to ask me about. There's a personal piece to this, there's a professional piece to this, there's a kind of today piece about this, there's a future piece about this. And one of the things that I have learned, a lot of people, let me just start with this. A lot of people think that I actually wrote the book during the pandemic. It was like a pandemic project of like, right, the world is in flux. And I always have to like pause and say, true, my book launched into the perfect storm, but I've actually been working on this theme of change and uncertainty and what do we do when we don't know what to do for the better part of the last 30 years. And what I like to say is that I bring three main lenses to this. Think of flux and change. It's timely. We're all dealing with a lot of change right now, but it's also timeless, right? Where change and uncertainty are just part of human history. Change has been around longer than any of us have been, right? So I'm looking at this kind of going backwards, but then also looking forwards, because there is actually more change ahead. And the last 2-3 years have been this crash course. But what I like to say is that the future looks more like the last few years than what came before it. And in that regard, I don't mean a pandemic necessarily. I don't mean any particular kind of change, but just this sense of constant change and flux and not knowing. And so as a result, we all just have this incredible opportunity to level up and to rethink how we relate to change, how we talk about change, how we think about change, and how we lean into uncertainty. But that goes against a lot of what we've been taught. So that's kind of like the level set of what is this? Why did I why did I think it was so important to really dive into this theme, this set of topics? But I kind of got a little bit ahead of myself. I mentioned that I bring kind of three main lenses to change and flux. And let me just share those real quick, because it'll give you a sense of me and hopefully spark some interest, spark some curiosity in all of you. So the first lens that I'm really looking at change through and I'm going sort of most recent back in my own history. The first is that of a futurist. Nora mentioned that I'm like, on some futurist lists, whatever, but people often ask me, what is a futurist? They think, are you like crystal balls and tarot cards? And that's not it. As a futurist, I'm helping organizations better understand what's on the horizon and how they fit into it. And the joke is that in the world of futurism, neither a pandemic, nor the Great Resignation, nor war, nor food insecurity, nor a whole bunch of real big problems we're grappling with today, those were not surprises, because we look at how we've designed certain systems to benefit some people and not benefit others, to not pay attention to what we're doing to the environment, et cetera, et cetera. These things were not surprises, but getting people to understand that can often be really hard. Now, in my role as a futurist, I've worked with all kinds of companies, nonprofits, different cultures, different norms, different business models, all of that. What I have seen is that regardless of what kind of organization, the size of the organization, where the organization is based, every single organization, and I could say every single person, struggles with change in some way. And not necessarily in the same way, but there's just a lot of room for improvement. And I continued to see this. And in particular, I continued to see how we were focused so much on what to do about change. How do we manage change? How do we engineer change? But we weren't talking about the human element of, well, how do I feel about this change? Do I feel excited about it or anxious about it? And two different people one can feel excited and one can feel anxious about the very same change, but we're not having those conversations. And so I really want to help catalyze a different kind of conversation that helps what we do be informed by who we wish to be. So that's one piece. The second piece is very much a global lens on change. And this is why I'm especially excited to be here with all of you. So my entire career has been international. Feel free to ask me about any part of it. I have traveled and worked in more than 100 countries at this point, overwhelmingly in the frontier and developing world. But I've worked in high-tech capitals. I've worked a lot in urban slums. I've worked with, mainstream communities. I've worked with marginalized communities. And what those experiences have taught me is that every single culture and society on the planet has developed its own way, well, I should say struggles with change, but also has developed unique ways of seeing change, talking about change, different concepts, different rituals, different vocabulary, different ways of dealing with the unknown. And what I mean by all of this is simply there is so much we can learn from one another if we can connect these dots. Because most humans, when they're dealing with change and uncertainty, they're working with basically in their own cultural silo. And that's not a bad thing. That's just a reality of humanity. Like when change hits, when we're dealing with uncertainty, we try to use the tools that are right around us, which can be helpful, but they're a really narrow slice of the tools and the approaches that are available. And so I might even ask you, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself again, but I just would ask all of you to reflect on as you grew up, were there different concepts, or in whatever tradition you come from, are there traditions, are there concepts, are there rituals, are there words that are unique in describing change and uncertainty? Because that's a really interesting starting point, and it might be something we can share with one another together. And last but not least, I've been talking a lot about the professional stuff and how I see the world, but my entry into Flux happened when I was 20, so long ago when I was at university, my entry, my baptism, if you will, into Flux. And when I was 20, when I was at university, both of my parents died in a car accident. And I share this not to freak anybody out. I want to be really clear, like I welcome talking about this, but I bring this up because I was effectively, in this period of my life, this as a young adult, where I hadn't started my career yet. And all of a sudden, my entire world kind of flipped upside down. Like everything changed. My family changed, my sense of self, my confidence, my view of the future, certainly my view of my career. And I started asking a very different kind of question at that point, at least different than a lot of my peers were asking. And that question was, if I were to die tomorrow, what would the world, so not my ego, not social media, not a boss, but the world need me to do today? And that led me down a very different path, making a very different set of decisions than I think many of my peers were making at the time. And I bring this up not to be a downer, but rather to be a kind of reality check and a helpful jumping off point. Because I never would have imagined, I had no idea back then that I would write a book about all this stuff. But I also didn't realize that we would have the last few years of FLUX. And so I'd actually been working on the book prior to the pandemic. It was well underway. Then the pandemic happened and it was like, okay, I have to get this done and out. But I bring all of these things up because I'm really interested in talking about personal change, professional change, organizational change, societal change. One thing I've learned is that we've all had very different experiences of change, and we all could use some help with change. And so that's sort of my opening around, like, where could we take this conversation? We can take it in any of many directions that may be of interest to you. But even as you sit here and kind of reflect on the changes and the kinds of uncertainties you've been grappling with over the last few years, earlier in your life, maybe earlier today, right? All of this is fair game. And the book FLUX is designed to help all humans in their own way better navigate and better relate to change and uncertainty and the unknown. So that was a long answer. My answers won't all be that long, but I hope that this gives you kind of a level set as to, like, why I'm excited to talk to you guys and who I am and what I'm trying to bring to the table.
Amazing. Thank you. I think that answer makes us all very excited to hear more of what you have to say. Well, you touched on this idea of all of us coming from different cultures, of having different perceptions of change. And do you want to go into that now, or for us to share, or should we save that for later?
Let's save it for later. Let's dig a little bit deeper, but jot some stuff down on a piece of paper or jot down some questions or put anything in the chat that you'd like as well. But I think let's come back to that a little bit later.
Okay. And could you share with us a little bit more about the central message of FLUX?
Yeah. So the central message of FLUX is that in a world of constant change and, like, relentless uncertainty, that humans, we all in our own way need to, I will say, radically reshape how we think about and relate to these things in order to have a healthy and productive outlook. And I say this because I know that every one of us, and let me just put some flavor around this. The word change, right? It's one word. We kind of treat it like one thing. But the reality is that change and uncertainty, these things are really messy. They're messy and they're complicated. We love them and we hate them, right? Pause for a moment and consider. Because I talk to people almost every day. People come to me and they're like, I love change. I'm a change junkie, right? And I'm always like, hold on a minute. Like, that's a really simplistic answer. Because in general, humans, you, me, most humans, we tend to love change we opt into. So think about a new job, a new adventure, a new relationship, a new haircut, right? Those are all changes that we love because we chose them. But we really struggle with the changes we can't control. The kind of change that blindsides you on a Tuesday afternoon, it goes against your expectations, it disrupts your plans, right? That's what a lot of the last few years have been, right? And most humans, I'm still looking for that person who's like, let me know if you know this person or if it's you, but like when something totally blindsides you and you're like, yeah, that was awesome. Like, no, humans don't like that. We are not hardwired that way. But also, think about the fact that the very same change may be really easy for you to navigate, and it might be really hard for me to navigate, and vice versa. Or think about the very same change could feel really slow to you while it feels really fast for me, or vice versa, right? We know that more change is around the corner, yet knowing this freaks us out. And I bring up these examples because I just want to tease out that change is not one thing. Change is really messy. And we've been, I think, largely trained, taught to believe that a lot of changes that humans can control them. Like the whole discipline of change management, by its very nature, we're going to manage change. We're going to engineer change. It implies that humans actually can control it. And I think what we're facing, and a lot of the last few years have shown us that, insofar as we believe we can control and predict and have the upper hand, what we're really chasing there is just an illusion of control. We'll get into some of the reasons why this is the case in a little bit, but I just kind of want to pause, and I might even encourage you, if you have a piece of paper or something nearby, like write down a list of changes in your life. You can sort of do like a T account. So you have a piece of paper and you draw a line down the middle, draw another line across the top, mark the left column with a plus and the right column with a minus. And in the plus column, write down all of the changes that you've loved recently. And then in the minus column, write down all of the changes that you've hated or struggled with. And we can come back to it because that's a really interesting starting place for your relationship to change. And back to the central concept of the book, which is this flux mindset, what I have figured out, or I don't want to sound like I've figured it out, but one of the ways that the threads of my research that I've been pulling on for many, many years, and one thing that's become really clear to me is that it's not about what we do about change. It's not about how or whether we manage change. It's how we see change, how we think about change, and a kind of relationship to change from the inside out. And a lot of this comes down to mindset. And so my proposed solution for how to bring, you could think of it as like calm and clarity to some of this messiness, and also how to build the skills we need to be ready for whatever changes are ahead, is this flux mindset. And a flux mindset is the state of mind. That's what mindset is. The state of mind that can see all change. So good and bad, expected and unexpected, and especially the hard stuff, that stuff you didn't see coming, that stuff you just wish would go away. It's the ability to see all of it as an opportunity to learn and grow and improve. So sometimes I think of a flux mindset as an attitude of abundance and optimism, but not naive optimism. Rather, it's a mindset that's grounded in the wisdom of what is and is not, what we can and cannot control, and especially like what really matters to you and to the world. So let me pause there. It's an abstract concept, but it's one that all of us have the ability to develop and to strengthen. And I should mention, like, I think of a mindset as a kind of mental muscle. And if you think of it as a mental muscle, then just like your arms and your legs and your biceps and your quads, you have to train it. You have to practice it. You have to strengthen it. And so that's what the book is about, but that's what I'm excited to help people do over the course of their lives. And just to be clear, I think, people say, oh, can I like develop this mindset and tick the box and move on? And I'm always like, these are skills for life. And these are skills that insofar as change will continue to show up in the world, as long as there's change, you will continue to have opportunities to strengthen this mindset. And it's one of those things, it's not just a skill for your career or for your family or for, your goals. It's a skill for every part of your life because there are so many different kinds of change.
Amazing. Thank you. I can reiterate what Armand said in the chat. This is really insightful and introspective because it's making, the piece that you said about we think that we, are people that really embrace and love change. And then when it's something that's out of our control, though, it's not the same idea. And that's something that resonated a lot with me. And you already kind of touched on like what is a flux mindset. So maybe you can share with us a little bit about like who can have a flux mindset. Is this for us as individuals, or is this something we can kind of like adapt into organizations and companies?
Yeah, I love this. So it does begin with individuals, but I do a lot of work with organizations around like culture, and everyone's grappling with change and what do we do? And, not just change in their personal lives, but organizational change and workplace changes. And I always like to say that individuals and organizations can develop a flux mindset. You begin with the individual because if you think about any organization is simply a collection of people, right? Any community is a collection of people. So you need to start with that individual unit. But when you're able to develop this mindset and work on your superpowers, which we'll get to in a little bit, you're actually able to make what I call fluxiness part of your organizational culture. And so there is a sequence through which this happens. And if you don't have individual, so much of this is about our self-awareness, right? Just an awareness of how I deal with change, how I think about change, how I feel about a given change. You need that individual self-awareness, but when you have it and you have it in community, then you're able to kind of blow the lid off, not just you and your colleagues. This affects teamwork, it affects collaboration, it affects leadership, strategy, all of these different kinds of things, because those are done with others. So the organizational fluxiness takes a bit longer, but it's absolutely possible. And it's super, super interesting to see organizations begin to embrace this and realize that, I don't want to sound too wonky here, but a lot of organizations today, their strategy for change is change management. And they're having a really difficult time because change management, and part of how I ended up writing the book, I was in so many different conversations about change management where everyone was focused on, what are we going to do? What do we do? What's our strategy? What's the output? Give us our process, give us our plan. And no one was talking about whether people were perceiving this change from a place, for example, of hope or fear. And I want to come back to that just for briefly, that one question, do you see a given change from a place of hope or fear, actually determines more than just about anything else when it comes to our relationship to change. And I know that might sound a little bit woo-woo. I don't think we talk about some of this stuff nearly enough. And whether you see a given change, and again, it could be the same change. I see it from a place of fear. It makes me anxious. You might see it from a place of hope. It makes you excited. And that's not good or bad. That just is based on how we were raised, based on the culture we come from, based on what we're grappling with and juggling in our own lives. But that one question, do you see a given change from a place of hope or fear, it actually could be the topic of many other books. That's one I would ask you all to sort of sit with and wrestle with, because in organizations, that is not a question we're asked. And yet, imagine if you were in a setting virtually or around a table with your colleagues, and you knew, we're so focused on setting strategy, but what if you knew whether each person around the table felt hopeful or fearful about that change? It would totally color and shape and determine whatever strategy you do set. It would allow you to get to know your colleagues better. It would strengthen your culture. It would do all of these things that right now, for the most part, aren't part of most organizations. So I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent here, but it does come back to this individuals and organizations and what a culture of fluxiness could look like.
Thank you. And our next question for you is about, I guess this maybe to come from the perspective of both a personal and professional kind of directed question of how did your time traveling and working in global development affect your views on change and influence the way you wrote Flux?
Yeah, profoundly. Now, what's interesting is I think even though I've been looking at these themes for like 30 years, which I realize is longer than most of you have been on this planet, which makes me feel really old, but I still feel young at heart. Anyway, over those 30 years, for the vast majority of that time, I didn't think I would write a book about these things. But what began to happen is I was seeing patterns of change. I was seeing very similar things playing out in very different settings, very different cultures. And it doesn't mean that two different cultures were reacting the same way to a given change. It meant that there was incredible diversity of approach, but incredible universality of the difficulties of what we're dealing with. And so if I think about, just for, again, a little bit of context, a lot of my work in global development was focused on access to finance and financial inclusion. So if you're familiar with microfinance, for example, I spent a lot of time on that. I spent a lot of time on access to education, access to water and sanitation, access to healthcare, all of these being affordable access for the economically active poor. And what that taught me about, you know, where talent is, right? Talent is not often at the best universities. Talent often doesn't, the top talent doesn't have access necessarily to university, but they're incredibly bright and entrepreneurial and getting stuff done. And the time that I spent living and working in a range of urban slums as well, this showed me, you know, people think, oh, an urban slum, it's, you know, that it's dangerous or that it's dirty or that, you know, take your pick of negative adjectives. But in fact, urban slums are vibrant places of economic activity, vibrant places of entrepreneurship. We just don't see them that way. Now, I bring this up, and Nora, it's interesting because I know you work with refugees. I would not wish the refugee experience on anyone, and it's not something that anyone wishes for or asks for. But what's really interesting to me is that when I'm asked, like, who is a person that knows FLUX better than anyone? Refugees. Actually, when you think about the refugee experience of not having any idea or very little idea of what tomorrow holds, where you may end up, what your family will be, your reality, this new life that you're going to hopefully be able to try to build. That is very much, that's the essence of FLUX. When you think about having to live with that kind of discomfort, that kind of uncertainty, and to become comfortable in the discomfort, to be able to approach the massive uncertainty, to nevertheless be able to lean into it and say, I'm still going to give today my best shot. And so I bring this up because I didn't work directly with a lot of refugees, but if you think about the economically active poor, if you think about anyone who's precarious in a situation where they don't necessarily have a lot of savings, they don't necessarily have a lot of stability. Should somebody get sick or die in the family, it creates a huge risk, right? All of those experiences, living and working with communities in that regard, what I realized is that these are some of the fluxiest people out there. And I love the term flux. We can sort of have fun with it in terms of fluxiness and fluxy and all of these different riffs on the word. But yet they weren't the people that were celebrated by society. They weren't the people that made the news. They weren't the people that we wrote up as great leaders and that sort of thing, right? And so part of me, it had a profound effect on expanding my view of who we can learn from, expanding my view of who are experts on a given topic, and expanding my view of the fact that people like this and cultures like this can be found everywhere. And one of the best things that I can help do is like connect those dots, right? Because I was working in Latin America and South Asia and the Middle East and Sub-Saharan Africa. I was working all over the place, but I was seeing the same dynamic play out. And so what I want to do with this is there is this universality of where do we find this fluxiness? We can find it everywhere, but we often are looking in places that mainstream business and society and so forth wouldn't be looking. I hope that makes sense. I will say too, and we'll come to back to the book in a minute. the book itself has like 34 different cultures in it, and different ways that cultures see change and different concepts that cultures have used to navigate change and uncertainty. And a lot of those actually do come from my time working around the world, and insights that I picked up from different peoples and cultures along the way.
Amazing. Well, this relates a lot to a question that we have from Sahar. Her most recent question in the chat very much relates to what you just said. If Sahar, maybe you want to ask directly to April, if that's okay with you.
Sure. Wait, so I do have two questions. Which one should I start with?
Whichever you want. I feel like the second one, it very much resonates with what April was just speaking about.
Okay, cool. Hi, April. Nice to see you. Thanks for joining us. I think something that you mentioned earlier about there being, the perception of change that could differ between two people. So the same change, but someone's maybe hopeful or fearful. I'm wondering, how do you navigate that when there's a team and half of the team is hopeful about a change and half are fearful about it? Where do you go in terms of next steps? How do you even begin to deal with something like that, a situation like that?
Yeah, so this hope and fear is a really fascinating thread to just pull on. We could probably spend the rest of our week talking about it. But it's fascinating to me. So number one is asking the question in terms of understanding where are people coming from. And what's amazing to me is just how rare it is for people to even have that conversation. But if you have a group where half of them are feeling fearful and half of them are feeling hopeful, I want to learn from those people who feel hopeful. I want to understand, how did they get there? And it may be how they're seeing a given change, but a lot of times it comes from a deeper, longer term place. There was some piece of how they grew up, some experience they had that taught them something, some way, because again, none of this happens in a vacuum. To develop this flux mindset means grooving, strengthening a muscle. They have been practicing something over time that allows them, that makes it easier for them to see a given change from a place of hope. I want to learn from them. And what's fascinating, it doesn't have to be in a group setting necessarily. Oftentimes conversations like this are very much one-on-one, but what I've seen happen often in organizations is you have one person who's feeling fearful. And again, we can extrapolate to a group, but if you begin having a one-on-one conversation, that one person who feels fearful, talking to one person who is hopeful and hearing their story and why do they see it this way? And again, not to say it's right or wrong or good or bad, but the people who are able to see, and again, from a place of hope that's not naive, but a place of hope that actually understands that in this world, I mean, what's interesting to me is that the world has always been full of uncertainty and always full of massive change. I think we've spent a lot of the last few decades in particular convincing ourselves otherwise, deluding ourselves in a way that we somehow have domain and control over what happens. I do think the last couple of years have shown us just how inaccurate and incorrect that approach is. But nevertheless, throughout history, if we know that the world has always been uncertain, we're now getting a sense of just how uncertain it is, and we know that more uncertainty is ahead, then I want to learn from these people who understand hope and who can channel hope and harness hope as much as I can. And again, though, just back to the group is individuals. And I've worked with organizations where, and again, not to get too wonky here, we've developed, they're not workshops per se, but they're modules around just understanding what is hope and how does hope manifest and where does hope manifest. And again, this might be a little strange, but hope is not something that typically resides in our brain. Hope resides in our heart. We don't talk about the heart that much at work. I mean, we talk about stress and we talk about burnout, but, and hope, again, I'm throwing some kind of funny anecdotes out there, But I work with groups where if something doesn't fit into a spreadsheet, they don't measure it. They don't have a place for it in their org chart. They don't have a place for it in their metrics. Hope matters more than just about anything else, and yet you can't put a value on it. And so I share this even because bringing up conversations, catalyzing conversations like this in a group is a really helpful place to start. Now, there will be people usually in an organization that are like, that's just so woo-woo. I'm here to tell you it's the hope and the fear and the trust and the empathy and the compassion. That's what helps organizations thrive over time. And I think we're living in a really interesting period right now, because I do think there's a gradual waking up of organizations recognizing that it's not just about numbers and earnings and spreadsheets and what our brain tells us, that there's a huge role for the heart. But we haven't designed a lot of our organizations that way. So even for you, I would say it's a way to kind of be a bit of an entrepreneur, an intrapreneur in your organization. It's a way to show a different kind of leadership, but a way to catalyze those conversations to hopefully help create more humane and human organizations as well. Glad you're here. Glad you are all here. This is great.
Thank you for answering one of our questions. I'm sure everyone will have a lot more questions for you in a minute. But I did want to get to our next question, which is giving a bit of a deeper dive into the 8 superpowers that you explain in your book. Can you give us a kind of a big picture, I guess, overview about what are these superpowers?
Yeah, super big picture. I'm going to go through them quickly. What I'm going to do right now is pull up a visual that just kind of makes it easy to see what I'm talking about. And this is in the book. And I think you all know you have the book. You can read the book at your leisure. I'm thrilled. Thank you, Global Citizen Year, for making it available. And so the 2 central themes of the book are this FLUX mindset, your relationship to change, your state of mind about change, but then the 8 FLUX superpowers. These are the skills and practices and like the how to thrive in constant change. So people are like, okay, I'm working on this mindset, but like, then what? What do I do to help bring this mindset alive, to help bring it to the surface? And the 8 superpowers are what we're looking at there. Think of each of these as a skill you can develop, each of these as a practice you could do every day, each of these as a tool in your toolbox of change. Each one, as I mentioned, is a chapter in the book. I want to be really clear. These are a menu, not a syllabus. And what I mean by that is that you don't have to study 1 before 2 or 2 before 3. You can work on just 1, you can work on all 8. I was mentioning to the team prior to starting this session that you can read the book backwards if you want. I suggest that you read the intro first, but then follow your curiosity. Go to whichever one of these piques your interest first. Chances are there will be 1 or 2 that you do like, that you're like, that's something I'm dealing with right now. Chances are that there will be a couple that you're like, that's just not my thing. And that's fine too. So I always like to tell people, like, just start with 1. So let me run through all of these really quite quickly. And then we'll see if there are questions about any of them or certain ones you want to dive deeper into. I do want to make just one, not caveat, but to be really clear, a lot of these superpowers, when you hear me say them, they may make you uncomfortable. They may make you go like, that is not what I was taught. In many cases, they're not what I was taught either. But the crux, the hook, what we're really looking at here, all of these superpowers, all of these skills are far more fit for a world and a future in flux, which is not the world that many of us were taught to believe that we were going to live in. So I want to bring that up because there's a tension here in a lot of what we were taught about the world doesn't align with the world as we're living it and experiencing it today. And so these superpowers are for that world, the world as it is, not the world as we wish it were. So I'm going to take these in order that they show up in the book. The first one is run slower. Now, this is all about anxiety and burnout and making wiser decisions. So the punchline here is that in an ever faster paced world, your key to success and thriving and well-being is to slow your own pace. And I don't mean stop or be lazy or quit or anything like that. I mean learning to live at a pace that is sustainable for all time and that allows you to see what's really going on and, what really matters. The second superpower, so we're going clockwise here on the screen. The second superpower is see what's invisible. This is all about identifying our blind spots and also discovering new insights, new opportunities, and new sources of value. The third one is get lost, which is all about stretching beyond your comfort zone and your relationship to the unknown. I do think Global Citizen Year is really good at helping fellows and alum get lost. This is one of my favorites that I think resonates really well with your mission. The fourth superpower is start with trust, which is all about nurturing relationships and navigating change together. And here, just a quick footnote. I call this one the FLUX superpower because when it comes to navigating change and uncertainty well over time, no one thing, as far as I can tell, no one thing matters more than trust. And you can think about this as trusting other people, trusting that the sun will rise tomorrow, most of all, though, trusting yourself. The fifth superpower is know you're enough. This is all about our obsession with more, but really more fundamentally, it's about our quest for true happiness. And again, here, the punchline is when we're always after more, and again, that could be more money, more power, more clothes, more likes, more clicks, more anything. When we're always after more, we will never find enough. By design, you can't find enough. And you're on this perpetual hamster wheel, if you will. But when you know you're enough, which includes knowing that you are enough, so this is not a typo on the screen, it's both you're enough, your point of balance and harmony and satisfaction, but also that you are enough, then you will immediately begin to see abundance where you saw scarcity before. The sixth superpower is create your portfolio career. And I will put a link in the chat around this one because this is all about how do you design and own your career in ways that are fit for a future of work in flux. So this one's a little bit unique because it's really about your work, your professional journey. And here the punchline is that the career shape of the future looks less like a ladder to climb or a path to pursue to ever higher plateaus. And rather, it looks more like a portfolio to curate, like an artist or an investor would. And I've written quite a lot on this, and my hunch is that for some of you, this could be really, really interesting as you're starting out in your careers and figuring out what matters most to you. But coming into the final stretch, the seventh superpower is be all the more human. Now, this one is all about our relationship to technology and the tension we face in that we're spending ever more time with our devices and yet ever less time with one another. And last but not least, the eighth FLUX superpower is let go of the future. And I have people say to me like, you're a futurist, you can't say that. It's not allowed. Let me be really clear. What this one is about is our relationship to control. And this is something I find is tricky for pretty much everyone today. If I had more space, if my editor had given me more space, I would have phrased this as letting go of our obsession with wanting to predict and control the future, because there is no one future, but rather many different possible futures that we are all contributing to every day. So this is a superpower, a skill that helps us see the future in different, more nimble and flexible and fluxy ways. So that's an overview. I'll stop that share now, and we can dive into any of these or turn back to some Q&A. because I know that was quite a debrief, but if you're interested in any of those, what's lovely, you have the book. Go pick up that chapter this weekend. Each of the chapters can be read easily in a sitting.
Perfect. I love that you said, like, follow your curiosity and pick a chapter that works for you and makes adapting this into our lives a lot easier. And
yeah,
I appreciate that you said you can even read the book backwards. That sounds like something fun to do.
Something fun. Not many books you get to do that. And I'm going to put in the chat, here's a piece that I wrote about portfolio careers, specifically for young adults, specifically for people who are, I think, in at least some of your situations where you're starting out saying, I don't know that a career ladder is, I don't know that success is at the top of a ladder. I don't know that that's what the world really needs these days. I want to carve a different kind of path. There's a place to start, but what's lovely, people often start with that article, and then they're like, wait a minute, I want to read more. And I'm like, check out the book. You guys already have the book. So you can also start with chapter 6.
Perfect. And maybe if anyone has any questions, feel free to send them into the chat or to unmute yourselves now.
Don't be shy.
Yeah. If anyone wants to unmute themselves, but we'll wait for some questions to possibly come into the chat, and then you guys can ask directly. But I would personally love to hear more about this superpower of creating kind of like a portfolio career. It's something I would personally love to hear more about. If you could do maybe a bit of a deeper dive into that.
Yeah, sure. So I do think, and I don't know if I can get a poll in this group, but like, I think that many of us, even today, we were raised to believe that you're supposed to study hard, get good grades, go to college if you can, get good grades, get a job, do said job, get promotions, retire, like linear, right? And I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm just saying that's one way of looking at your professional journey that's not really up to date with the world today. And what's fascinating, if you look into it, career, thanks, Elaf. And I can add a personal piece here too, but let me give you some historical context. The idea of a career ladder is a direct result of the first industrial revolution, which happened about, 250 years ago. That was the first time that we actually had industrial scale, get people into organizations and move them up. And again, I'm not saying that's bad. I'm just saying that's one model. But you have a lot of people today saying, I don't want to be on a ladder, perhaps because you want more flexibility, you want to actually have more agency over what you do. Perhaps you've seen family members or other people on the ladder and not very happy. Perhaps you want to get off that ladder. And the reality is that in today's world, there have never been more ways to earn income. It's never been easier or cheaper or more diverse to have ways to earn income and contribute to society. And my own personal story was that I always got really frustrated growing up when people would say, are you going to study A or B? Do you want to major in X or Y? And I was always like, I'm interested in what's in between A and B. I'm interested in all of these things. And it's not that I'm not able to focus. It's not that I'm scattered. It's that I don't think the world is just about one vertical and spending the rest of my life in that vertical. And true, I could never pick which one thing I wanted to focus on most. And then I will add also, I was feeling that way growing up as a teenager. I just felt like I was trapped in this kind of box that didn't fit how I wanted my future to play out. And then my parents died. And all of a sudden, when I lost my parents, and both of my parents were teachers, public school teachers, didn't have a lot of money, but they did prioritize education. But all of a sudden, I had to take responsibility for my life and my future. And I realized, well, if I were to die tomorrow, what does the world need me to do today? And at the time, my professors were telling me that I should, with my degrees, I should go, work at an investment bank or a consulting firm and work my way up. And with all due respect to consulting firms and investment banks, I kept thinking to myself, my God, if I'm going to die tomorrow, The world does not need another investment banker. The world does not need another consultant. But what am I supposed to do? I need to carve something different. And so I share this because I'm very aware of the fact that I wanted a career portfolio long ago, but there was no language for it, and it was stigmatized. Many years later, we now have a different vocabulary. The stigma is still there to some degree, but what's fascinating is that even companies want to hire more diverse talent. They want to hire people who don't look at their career from a ladder, but they don't know where to start either because they're so entrenched in this career ladder design. And so think about a portfolio. When I say portfolio, this is far more than your resume. Your portfolio, and again, I can frame this a couple different ways, depending on whether you're a creative or whether you're a quant or like whatever analogy fits best with you, use that. Think about an artist. What's in an artist's portfolio? The work she's most proud of, she or he is most proud of. Investors design portfolios to balance risk, to minimize risk and maximize returns. Executives use what's called portfolio theory, you can Google it, to craft strategies that balance the future with the present. So there are lots of different portfolios in terms of the concept that you can use. The key here is that your portfolio contains everything you can do, like to do, and that can bring value to society. And it's far more than your title and your credentials. And what's fascinating to me, your resume, think about your resume or your CV. It contains a fraction of who you are and what you can do. Think about it, it contains like your GPA and where you've worked. Is that what's is that what allows you to bring your best self to the table? Typically not. Now, in a group of, I would say more of people who are like in organizations, I'm often working with people who are a bit older. And I often ask them, I say, how many of you are a parent, right? Parenting skills are not typically on one's resume. And often they're like, that's a ding. If you're a parent, people think, oh no, can you commit fully to your job? Parenting skills are superpowers. If you think about the superpowers that your parents might have in terms of conflict negotiation, time management, all of these different things. I use this as an example of something that's not on your resume, but that would be absolutely central to your portfolio. I'm guessing that many of you, whether or not you've ever had a job or been paid or anything like that, you all already have a portfolio that you can begin to curate. And it's a much more holistic way of looking at your career and how you want to design it. And also in particular, how you want to own it, how you want to actually be in the driver's seat of your own career. Because I think, and I know this might sound like a little bit of bitter medicine, and I'm not saying that it's not about whether you have a job or not. Jobs are part of your portfolio. Your volunteer roles are part of your portfolio. Things that you do that have no professional bearing at all, but you love are in your portfolio. Being a sibling, having a younger or an older sister or brother that you help take care of, that's part of your portfolio. All of this, these are all skills that can help you professionally as well. But I do want to bring up that even if, well, any job, and even if it's a job that you love, even if it's a job that you're really good at, any job that someone else has given to you can actually be taken away. Whether or not you want it to be that way, whether or not they want it to be that way. But why I bring this up is that your portfolio is yours forever. Your portfolio and curating and crafting your portfolio is something that you have control and agency of and responsibility for, regardless of what happens in the world or in the workplace. So I know that's a pretty broad brush, like what is a portfolio, but I want to kind of distinguish who might like to craft a portfolio and how it's different from your resume and how it's different from a career ladder.
Thank you so much for more insight into that.
Yeah.
I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up the session here. Thank you, April, so much for sharing all of your knowledge and insights with us. And I think I can speak for everyone that we're very excited to do even a deeper dive individually into the book. And from whichever chapter we start with, I'm sure we will walk away from the book having learned so much and not just walking away with information, but enacting it into our lives and making real change out of it. So I appreciate that so much. And hopefully you can join us again in the future.
I would love to. I am just a huge fan of each and every one of you. I'm really glad that you made time for this today. I also just wanted to say I am a totally open book. Find me on LinkedIn, connect. If you have follow-up questions, feel free to ask. Like, I'd love to get to know each and every one of you. So please do feel free to reach out. And also, if you want more, you've got the book already, so you're in really good shape. But if you want things like podcast interviews or little articles, where's a list of the superpowers, more information on all of this, the website is fluxmindset.com. So just to make it easy to like, where do I go? Or if you want to share any of this information with others. So thank you all again. It's been a real joy. Happy Friday. I know people are in different time zones, but I do think it's Friday everywhere. And I hope everyone enjoys the weekend. It's been a real treat.
Yes, thank you so, so much. Have a great evening, everyone, or night, morning.
Bye all.